Russia, a state which was damaged the most during the World Crisis. We have lost not only our imperial glory, but our people, and every place where we brought our civilization for the past 300 years. All our successes have been wiped out. It all started almost 20 years ago, in February 1917, when Tsar Nicholas II has abdicated his throne, and power was given to the Russian Provisional Government, which wasn't supported by the Russian people. Many glorious figures have tried to stop them, but only Bolsheviks did it successfully. Later, in 1920, they were successfully crushed by the White forces, and Moscow with Petrograd was liberated from the Red tyranny. For the past 15 years, the leading political parties, the Socialist Revolutionaries and Cadets, have governed our country, but they made everything even worse. Democracy has destabilized the Russian Republic, and no major reforms have been made since the collapse of the Russian Empire. Today, Russia is becoming increasingly unstable, and radical political factions are growing across the country. One of them is NRPR, the People's Republican Party of Russia, which is headed by Boris Savinkov, a radical leftist in the past who has a plan to transform Russia into a state that belongs only to the Russian people. Everybody knows about the upcoming crisis from Berlin, and everybody sees the increasing role of the Third International in Europe. In the next 10 years, the situation in Europe, as well as the balance of power, will be changed forever, and Russia should be the main character in this change. The Russian state will define and outline the security structure in Europe after the Second World Crisis, to prevent the Third World Crisis, which could lead to the end of the human civilization. Mr. Savinkov can't let this happen. He wants to do everything to prevent this, but simultaneously return to Russian greatness. If Democrats and liberals think that the election works for them and people approve the state course which is headed by them, we will prove the opposite by winning the 1936 legislative elections. Russia will rise like a phoenix from the ashes. The year 1936 began with the assassination of Kerensky. He was shot climbing the steps to the Senate House. When the police arrived, they recognized the killer. It was Pavel Gargulov, one of the members of the well-known NRPR. After that shot, the fate of Russia was irrevocably changed. The country was thrown into chaos. The Speaker of the Senate, Dmitry Romanov, became an acting president. The leading coalition of cadets and socialist revolutionaries has collapsed, and that means that Russia needs to hold new elections, where every single political structure will take part, no matter if it's radical leftist or radical rightists. Everybody should be able admitted to the elections, to show the real beliefs of Russian society, to finally have a legitimate ruler of the state. The criminal regime of Kerensky's band decided to punish Gargulov for killing the so-called president of Russia. The masses didn't approve of that trial, which only increased the popularity of the young political faction. But instability didn't stop on that. A few weeks later, the Germans forced us to pay the remaining part of the Brest-Litovsk reparations, a treacherous treaty, which was signed by the Bolsheviks in 1918. We paid the remaining part of the reparations to the Teutons, but here is the problem that arises from it. The current state budget is empty, and it has gone only months from the year 1936. If we don't stabilize the situation, the consequences can be much harder than an empty treasury. But remember that after every dark night there is a brighter day. Our gift of fate was the Alash Orda, which broke away from us right after Kerensky's death. A wise Kazakh people and their government understood that without Russian support, water and food, they are unable to live in decent conditions, so only as a part of the reformed Russia they can afford a life that won't be just a nomadic lifestyle. The territory of Kazakhstan will be modernized and industrialized. Russia will take care of every single Kazakh that lives on its territory. But to do that, first we need to transform Russia, and the first step for it is gonna be dealing with the Black Monday crisis. The first plan to deal with the crisis was proposed by the State Duma, It's supported by different left organizations and NRPR. It involves immediate state intervention in the economy with the nationalization of the key industries and German enterprises, as well as subsidizing agriculture. The second plan was proposed by the so-called Senate. It's supported by the president and right-wing cadets, conservatives and Eurozines. It calls for a protectionist approach that tries to keep the state from interfering in the economy and at the same time save it from falling into the abyss by attracting private domestic investments. Now there is no time for debates, so one of the plans must be signed no matter what. The Duma's plan was better described and it included more measures to save the fallen economy of Russia. Plus, it guaranteed that left fractions wouldn't raise any protests against the current unstable government. That's why it was accepted by the majority of politicians. In February 1936, the president announced snap legislative elections, which would be held in May, so we still had a few months to win the popularity of the people and prove them that only Savinkov and NRPR can save the Russian state from the entire collapse. In March 1936, he addressed to the nation with a great speech, which was heard by tens of millions of Russians. Savinkov charismatically spoke about ending Russian isolation and improving the economy with his program Perestroika and the vital reorganization of agricultural lands. In the end of his speech, he promised that he will do everything to make Russia great again. The hearts of millions froze after this. They have finally found the real man, the Russian Napoleon, the Russian Alexander the Great, who can not only tell about the greatness, but also do everything to gain it. After that, not many people were surprised by the NRPR's victory in that election, because Savinkov was the most spoken person in Russia in 1936. Congratulations, Boris Viktorovich! Yet he still doesn't have full control of the Russian state, but that victory was the first step to clear the political arena. But our victory was only the beginning of the huge mess. Dmitry Romanov, the acting president, decided to criticize the election results. By doing that, he not only insulted us, but insulted the Russian people as well, who decided that we should rule the country. Other non-radical right fractions joined to criticize us as well. So if you want war, you will get it. First, they criticized the election results, and then the Senate elected a different president from one that we proposed. The Senate showed its true face. They choose to centralize power in their hands, but the government elected by Duma decided to stay by our side. We want to do everything in a legal way, so the so-called Democrats and liberals will be destroyed by their own system. A few weeks later, as we planned it, we signed a coalition with the PSR. Of course, we see them only as a useful fools. Of course, not the whole party supported the coalition, but the majority said its final word. This coalition was the final nail in the coffin for the Senate. Due to the pressure of the State Duma, they were forced to call a new presidential election. To avoid aggravating the political crisis, they are likely to vote for the candidate of the NRPR. And here is the new president of Russia, Dmitry Adinets, the right hand of Boris Savinkov. Once he was a social democrat, but now he's a People's Republican. Many of the NRPR members were once social democrats or socialists. Boris Savinkov was also once a socialist, so our fraction doesn't see any problem with it. But there is a bigger problem. The Reichspakt. Ukraine has destroyed a dual power system on its territory, so now Russian population isn't protected here. A dual power system gave us a hope that one day we would negotiate with Ukraine and they would take our side of this conflict. Now it's impossible. Kharkov, the hometown of Boris Savinkov, is under Ukrainian rule, and with the new course of the state, they will do everything to change this city forever. We can't afford this to happen. The even worse situation we've got in Crimea, where Bolsheviks headed by a brother of Lenin took power, and they claimed that the city of Sevastopol would be the new bastion of Bolshevism. The old imperial glory is officially dead, but the new Russia headed by Vozhd shall rise soon, and all enemies of our state will be killed and destroyed. That's why in April 1937 we created our own political faction, the Moscow Court, and the first decision as a serious player player on the world stage would be repudiating the Minsk Treaty, which blocked our country from any foreign affairs for almost 20 years. That's enough. That was only the first step of the new Russia, because the second one was changing the current constitution and merging the prime ministers and presidents' offices. The constitutional court is finally controlled by our people, so signing it was only a formal procedure. After 20 years of humiliation, defeat and foreign control, the Russian state has finally risen from the ashes. The Russian state is as strong as it hasn't been since 1914. The patriotic spirit is now at its peak, and the entire Russian people are expecting global changes. Savinkov is proclaimed the worst of Russia. Glory to worst. The final words of Savinkov's inaugural speech were, "Freedom of Rus is bound to rise."